Texas Hill Country, 1872. The wind carried the scent of mesquite smoke and dust as the sun bled low behind the cedar-covered hills. Jeline James had not eaten in 2 days. She stood on the edge of the dry creek, her boots cracked, her dress torn at the hem and her arms wrapped tight around her ribs. Her son Elijah, just 7, leaned against her leg, his face hollow with hunger. Beside him, her daughter Emmy, 5, clutched a ragged doll with missing eyes. The children had not spoken in hours. The man on the horse watched her from a few feet away, his hat low over his brow, his coat worn and dusty. His name was Fletcher Ames, and he had not meant to find anyone out here. He had been trailing cattle escapees from the winter storm when he saw the smoke and followed it, thinking maybe there was a fire. What he found instead was the burnt-out remains of a wagon, 2 children, and a woman with eyes like shattered glass. Jeline stepped forward, her voice low. "I ain't got nothing left," she said. "No food, no money. I can't let them starve." Fletcher's gaze dropped to the children, then back to her. She took a shaky breath and forced the words out. "If you help us, you can have me." Her hands trembled as she lifted the edge of her shawl. "Just keep them alive, please." Fletcher dismounted slowly. He did not speak for a long moment, just looked at her, really looked at her. The sharp bones of her face, the dirt on her skin, the way she stood between him and those kids like a wall of flesh and grief. Then he said, quiet but solid, "No. I do not want your body." Jeline blinked, startled. "I want your name beside mine." She stared at him, not understanding. He removed his hat and stepped closer, letting her see his face in full. He was maybe 30, with a rough jaw and eyes like a storm rolling in. "I will take you and your young ones to my ranch, not for this," he said, nodding to her offer. "For something real, if you will have me." Tears stung her eyes. "Why?" "Because no woman should have to trade herself to keep her children breathing," he said. "You want to survive, then come with me. I will give you a roof, food, safety, but I want your name beside mine, not your body in my bed out of pity." Elijah looked up. "Are you a good man?" he asked. Fletcher met the boy's eyes and nodded. "I try to be." Jeline dropped to her knees, pulling both children close. She did not cry. She had cried enough in the last week to last her whole life. But her fingers gripped her kids like she could anchor them to this moment, like she was afraid Fletcher might vanish. He did not vanish. He built a fire and made coffee, then rummaged in his saddlebag and pulled out dried beef and cornmeal. He gave the children food first, then offered Jeline a wrapped biscuit he had saved from the morning. She took it with shaking hands and whispered, "Thank you." They rode back to his ranch in silence. It was past midnight when they reached it, a modest house near the Pedernales River, tucked between ridges, the fence mended with care, not wealth. He led her inside, lit a lamp, and showed her the spare room. "You and the children stay in here," he said. "I will be in the barn. You lock the door if it helps you sleep." Jeline looked up at him, unsure what to make of this man who refused what so many others would have taken. "You do not want anything from me," he hesitated. "Just your name. When you are ready." She closed the door gently behind her. The next morning, Jeline found a basin of clean water and a brush waiting outside her door. Fletcher had already gone out to tend the horses. The children were asleep still, curled up together beneath a quilt someone had stitched with care. She washed her face, combed her hair, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, and the sky pale with morning light. Fletcher was hauling hay. He saw her and stopped. "You do not need to work," he said gently. "I want to," she replied. "I cannot just sit and do nothing," he nodded. "Then come with me. I will show you the feed shed." By noon, she knew where the grain bins were, how to sweep the coop, and which chickens laid most regular. She moved with quiet determination, her children trailing behind her, slowly blooming under the warmth of full bellies and safety. That night, after the children were tucked in, Jeline stepped out onto the porch. Fletcher was there, sitting with his boots up on the rail, watching the stars. She sat beside him. "You know nothing about me." "I know enough," he said. "I was born in Georgia. My husband got killed last winter trying to stop a man from stealing our last mule. We tried to travel west to find family in El Paso, never made it. I am sorry." She nodded. "You still want my name?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked over at her. "Because you are strong and you have not let this world break you. That is the kind of woman I want beside me." She did not speak, just leaned back in the chair and watched the stars with him. The days passed. Jeline worked in the kitchen and the garden. The children helped collect eggs and fed the goats. Fletcher taught Elijah how to saddle a horse, and Emmy rode in front of him when he checked the fence lines. The house no longer felt like someone else's place. It felt like home. One evening, Jeline found Fletcher at the barn, washing his hands in a bucket. She stood by the door, heart pounding. "I want you to know my name," she said. He looked up. "Jeline James," she said, stepping closer. "And if you still want it beside yours." "I want that too." He dropped the cloth, crossed the space between them, and took her face in his hands. "I have been waiting for you to say that." Then he kissed her. It was not rushed or rough. It was slow, steady, like he meant every second. And she kissed him back, arms around his neck, heart full with something she had not felt in a long time: hope. Hope and something deeper. Love. Jeline stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, a sheen of sweat at her temple despite the morning chill. The bread dough beneath her hands was soft, rising slow in the bowl she'd covered with a clean flour sack. She'd never worked with this kind of stove before, a cast iron monarch with a warped stovepipe and a draft that always needed coaxing, but she was learning. Fletcher had built a new woodbox beside it, and yesterday he'd split her a stack of cedar that burned hot and even. Behind her, the children sat at the table. Emmy hummed tunelessly while threading dried beans onto a string. Elijah had a scrap of paper and charcoal, the last stub from Fletcher's writing tin, and was bent low, tongue between his teeth as he sketched something with sharp, careful strokes. When Fletcher stepped in from the porch, boots scuffed with red dirt and his coat dusted with chicken feathers, he didn't speak right away. He slipped off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, and hung his coat on the peg near the door. Then he took a seat across from Elijah and studied the boy's drawing. "That a horse?" Elijah shook his head. "It's that mule. The one with one ear bent sideways, the one you said was too smart for his own good." Fletcher grinned faintly. "You got him just right." Jeline wiped her hands on a rag and turned. "You're back early." "Fence line near the ridge held. Figured I'd rather be here than looking at posts that don't need fixing." She didn't answer, just poured water into a tin cup and passed it to him. Their fingers brushed. He didn't pull away. Later, after the bread was baking and the children had wandered outside to race sticks along the irrigation ditch, Jeline found herself alone with him on the porch. She leaned against the post, arms folded, eyes on the horizon where the hills folded blue into the distance. "Emmy asked me last night if we were going to stay here forever." Fletcher looked up from the bridle he was oiling. "What did you tell her?" "I said I didn't know. Seemed like the truth." He nodded slowly. "If you'd rather find kin out west, I'll help you get there." She didn't answer right away. The wind stirred her hair and she tucked a piece behind her ear without thinking. "I don't want to leave," she said finally, "but I don't want to be a burden either." "You think you are." "I don't bring much," she said. "No land, no dowry, no name that opens doors." Fletcher set the bridle aside. "You bring steadiness. Work done without complaining. A way of looking at things that makes it easier to breathe. That's worth more than any name carved into a silver spoon." Jeline looked down at her hands. The skin across her knuckles was cracked from washing and weather. She flexed her fingers once. "Before my husband died," she said, "we were planning to plant pecans. Thought we'd start small, 3 trees. He said even if we died before they gave fruit, someone would taste it one day because of us." Fletcher leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Would you like to plant some here?" Jeline blinked. "You'd let me? I'd dig the holes myself." For a long moment, she watched the wind move through the cedar branches. Then she stepped closer and sat beside him on the step, close enough their shoulders touched. "I think I'd like that." He didn't answer, only reached over and took her hand roughened like his, sun-browned and scarred in places. He turned it palm up, ran his thumb across the base of her fingers. "First year I had this place," he said, "I spent most nights just staring at the rafters, wondering if anything I built would hold. And did it? Not until now." A quiet settled between them. Not empty, but full of something slow and steady like river water over stone. She didn't pull her hand away. That night, Jeline found a small, folded square of cotton tucked beneath her pillow. Inside was a single pecan, shell slightly cracked, its meat visible within. No note, just the seed and the silence. She held it between her fingers a long time before placing it careful in the cup that sat on her windowsill, the one she used to catch rainwater. Then she lay down beside her children, the sound of crickets outside the only thing that marked the hours until dawn. The pecans arrived 2 days later in a burlap sack tied with twine, brought by a traveling peddler who traded them for a pair of tanned rabbit hides and a tin of lard. Fletcher met the man at the gate, bartered without hurry, and carried the sack into the house with a quiet nod to Jeline. She didn't speak as she ran her fingers through the smooth, oiled shells. There were 6 in all, wrapped in straw young saplings, not seeds. She touched the roots gently, her face unreadable. They planted them near the back pasture, where the hills sloped gentle and the soil stayed damp after rain. Elijah dug beside Fletcher, careful and deliberate. Jeline held the saplings upright as Emmy fetched water from the rain barrel. They worked until the sun dropped low enough to turn the sky bronze. No one rushed. The air smelled faintly of turned earth and cedar pollen. When the last tree was in the ground, Jeline stood back and brushed soil from her skirts. "They'll need tending," she said. Fletcher wiped his hands on his trousers. "So will we." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask him to. That night, she sat at the kitchen table after the children had gone to bed, needle in hand, stitching a hem along a strip of muslin. Fletcher carved a block of wood nearby, long strokes of his knife shaping the square into something smaller. The lantern between them gave off a low, steady glow. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Did you ever think about marriage before this?" He set the wood down. "Once, a long time back. She married someone with more land." Jeline nodded, eyes on her stitching. "I was 17 when I married. Thought I knew what love was." Fletcher leaned back in his chair. "And now, I think it's steadier than I knew, less fireworks, more showing up, every day." He didn't reply, but his fingers brushed hers when he reached for the carving. She let them linger. The next morning, Elijah stood at the doorway with a handful of bird feathers, solemn and quiet. "They were by the coop," he said. "Something got the red hen." Fletcher took the feathers and turned them over in his palm. "Fox, most likely." "I can sit watch tonight," Elijah offered. "You can help me shore up the wire instead," Fletcher said. "Won't be the last time something tries to take what's ours." Jeline said nothing as she folded a clean blanket and laid it across the foot of the bed. Later, as she swept the porch, she watched Fletcher and Elijah hammer a length of board across the coop's low corner. Neither spoke much. Emmy sat nearby with a dull nail and a piece of driftwood, tracing shapes. When rain came that Sunday, it came heavy. Water pooled beneath the windows and dripped from the eaves. Inside, the house smelled of damp wool and simmering beans. Jeline moved through the rooms lighting small tapers, one by one. Fletcher stood by the hearth, sharpening a blade on a whetstone. She paused near him, drying her hands. "I never said yes," he straightened. "To what? You asked for my name. I never gave it, not fully." Fletcher set the blade aside. "I figured you were still considering." She folded the towel. "I've been watching. How you are with them, with me." "You don't say much, but you don't have to." He waited. She stepped closer and laid her hand lightly against his chest. "You can have my name if you still want it." His voice was quiet. "I do," she nodded once. "Then you will." No more was said. There was no ceremony, no paper signed. But that night, when she moved toward the bed where her children slept and Fletcher turned toward the barn as he always did, she stopped him. "You don't have to sleep out there," she said. He searched her face. "You sure?" She looked down the hall, then back to him. "I'm not scared anymore." He reached for her hand, and they walked together into the room where the window panes rattled soft with wind and the quilt smelled faintly of lavender from the garden's last harvest. She did not tremble when he touched her. When he kissed her temple and rested his hand over hers, she let herself breathe in fully. Outside, the trees drank deep. The ground softened, and in the dark, something long dormant settled into place, quiet, sure, and unshakable. The frost came early, biting through the hill country before the leaves had fully turned. Fletcher rode out before sunrise to check the upper pasture, leaving Jeline with a kettle of coffee and a list of tasks he'd spoken low over their shared bread the night before. Mend the back gate hinge, watch Emmy's cough, and make sure Elijah didn't take the mule too far upriver again. By mid-morning, Jeline had wrapped Emmy in her old shawl and set her near the hearth with a spoonful of honey and vinegar. Elijah sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting dried beans by color, his mouth tight with the concentration that always came just before he asked something weighty. "Did you ever think about leaving?" he said without looking up. Jeline paused, the needle in her hand hovering just over the patch she was stitching onto Elijah's winter shirt. "Leaving what? Here, this place?" "Him." She set the needle down slow. "Why do you ask that?" Elijah shrugged, but his shoulders stayed stiff. "Some boys at the creek said folks like us don't belong on land like this. They said mas don't marry cowboys, and cowboys don't raise other men's children." Jeline crossed the room and knelt beside him, her voice even. "What a man does with his hands shows more than what he says with his mouth. You know what Fletcher's done since we got here?" Elijah nodded, fidgeting with a chipped button. "He teaches me things. He trusts you to help him, and he trusts me to stand beside him. That's what matters." Elijah didn't answer, but his shoulders eased a little. Jeline kissed the top of his head and went back to her mending. Fletcher returned before dusk, the edge of his coat stiff with sleet. He didn't shake off the cold right away, just stepped into the kitchen and let the warmth hit him slow. Jeline poured hot water over a cloth and passed it to him without speaking. He pressed it to the back of his neck and exhaled through his nose. "East fence is near gone," he said. Something pushed through. Might have been a bull from the Carson place. "I'll ride with you tomorrow," Jeline replied. "He's been letting his stock wander too close." Fletcher looked at her over the rim of the cup she handed him. "You ride steady, better than most." He nodded once, then glanced toward the children's room. "They do all right today?" Elijah asked if I plan to stay. Fletcher didn't flinch. "And what did you tell him?" I said I already have. He set the cup down. "I reckon he needs to hear it from me too." That evening after supper, Fletcher motioned Elijah outside. Jeline watched them through the window as they crossed to the shed. The boy looked straight ahead, hands jammed in his coat pockets. Fletcher moved slower, letting Elijah set the pace. When they returned, Elijah hung his coat without a word, but his face had settled into something quiet and sure. He didn't ask again. Later, once the house had gone still and only the low tick of the coals remained, Jeline sat on the porch step, her feet wrapped in an old quilt. Fletcher joined her without speaking, the flask in his hand half full with something he only drank on winter nights. She looked at the sky, stars sharp against the black. "You ever miss being alone?" "No. Not even a little." He took a long, slow sip. "Had plenty of years to know what it felt like. I'd rather hear Emmy's cough and Elijah's boots on the floorboards than the wind howling through an empty house." Jeline turned her head, studying him in profile. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd take what he could get from a woman with nothing. Someone who'd use kindness like a hook." Fletcher shifted, setting the flask on the rail. "I ain't ever seen you as nothing." She reached out, her fingers tracing the edge of his sleeve. "I know that now." He caught her hand and brought it to his chest, just over the beat of his heart. "You're not just here for shelter anymore, Jeline, I know. You're not just a mother or a widow or a woman trying to survive." She nodded, eyes steady. "I'm yours." "And I'm yours," he said. Wind stirred the bare branches beyond the porch. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called once, then fell silent. Jeline leaned into his shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her as if he'd done it 1,000 times. They didn't speak again that night, not even when they rose and walked inside together, the door closing soft behind them. The first calf of the season came before dawn, slick with afterbirth and trembling on spindly legs. Fletcher had gone out in the dark with only a lantern and a coil of rope, and when he returned, his coat smelled of wet hide and straw. Jeline met him at the door with a folded towel and a basin of warm water. He didn't speak, just let her wipe the grime from his hands while the children still slept. Afterward, she followed him to the kitchen and poured coffee into a heavy mug. He sat at the table, elbows braced, eyes distant. "Was the mother all right?" she asked. "Stubborn," he said, voice gravel low, "didn't want to turn, took longer than it should have." She slid the mug toward him, then leaned against the counter. "You do this every spring," he nodded. "Every spring since I cleared this land." She studied the line of his jaw, the deepening creases near his eyes. "You ever think about leaving it behind, the ranching, the long nights?" He didn't look up. "No, it's not the work I mind. It's the quiet that used to follow it." Jeline crossed the room and sat beside him. "You don't have that quiet now. No, not since you." They stayed like that a while, the coffee cooling between them. When Elijah padded in with a blanket around his shoulders and Emmy trailing behind, Fletcher rose and ladled corn mush into bowls. Jeline filled the kettle again. By noon, the sun had melted the last of the frost, and Jeline took Emmy to the spring-fed wash pit with a bundle of linens. Fletcher and Elijah were already out by the lower creek bank, mending a stretch of fence where the last storm had undermined the posts. The girl splashed her feet along the shallows while Jeline scrubbed shirts against a washboard. A voice behind her startled her. "You work quiet." She turned. Fletcher stood there, hair damp from the creek and sleeves rolled. "You always walk up on folks like that." "I figured you heard me. You're not the kind to miss much." He crouched beside her, resting his arms on his knees. "I've been thinking about building a smokehouse. Could cure meat proper, maybe trade more come fall." She wrung out a pillowcase. "You want my opinion?" "I want more than that." She folded the linen into the basket. "Then say what you mean." He didn't answer right away. Just watched Emmy chase a frog near the bank, her laughter echoing through the trees. "You're more than what I hoped for," he said at last. "I didn't know I'd get this far. I thought I'd die out here with a fence post in one hand and a shovel in the other." Jeline picked up another shirt, her voice steady. "You won't die alone. Not anymore." That night, after the children were asleep, Jeline found Fletcher sitting at the edge of the porch, sharpening a scythe. She sat beside him, drawing her knees to her chest. The stars above were bright and close, the kind of sky that made the world feel smaller and safer. "I want to give you something," she said. He set the blade down. "You already have." She reached into the pocket of her apron and withdrew a small square of folded muslin. Inside lay a silver ring, thin and worn, the edge smoothed by years of wear. "It was my mother's," she said. "My father gave it to her when they married under a dogwood tree back east. She gave it to me when I turned 18. I thought I'd never wear it again." Fletcher held it carefully between his fingers. "You want me to wear it?" "No," she said. "I want to take your name, proper, and I want to wear this when I do." He looked at her then, full and open. "We'll do it quiet. No preacher needed. Just you and me and the land that knows us." They married beneath the pecan saplings the next morning. Elijah stood tall beside Fletcher, holding Emmy's hand. Jeline wore her mother's ring and a dress she'd mended herself, and Fletcher pressed a kiss to her brow with reverence. That afternoon they returned to their work, feeding livestock, mending harness, gathering eggs. Nothing changed, and yet everything did. Years passed. The pecan trees grew tall and strong, their roots deep in the hill country soil. Elijah took to the cattle like he'd been born to it, and by 16, he'd broken his own horse. Emmy learned to brew tinctures from the wild herbs Jeline taught her to gather, and more than one neighbor came by with a sore throat or a swollen ankle asking for help. Fletcher and Jeline built the smokehouse together, then a second room onto the house when the walls grew too tight with the life they'd made. They never left the land. One spring, as Jeline walked the pasture with a basket of early greens, she paused beneath the tallest pecan tree. Fletcher joined her, his gait slower now but steady. He took her hand and they stood together in the shade, watching the wind ripple through the grass. "You ever wonder what might have happened if I'd kept riding that day?" he asked. "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "Because you didn't," he smiled, lines deepening around his mouth. "I still don't need your body, you know." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "I gave you everything. You never needed to take it." They stayed there until the sun dipped low, the shadows stretching long across their land. The children were grown, but the house still echoed with voices, laughter, and the sound of two hearts that had chosen one another when the world offered little else. They did not grow rich, but they never went hungry again, and they never spent another night alone.